All right, so we are now recording. Welcome to tonight's webinar. Thank you for tuning in this evening. My name is Christopher Lyle. I'm the Education and Advocacy Director here at Wolf Park. And I'm really excited to welcome Scott, Wayne, and Paul from Animal Wellness Action to Wolf Park's virtual platform. This organization has been really instrumental in helping wolves get back on the endangered species list in the Great Lakes region for many years. And we are really thrilled to kind of dive into all of the steps that it takes to protect wolves, whether through policy or advocacy, in tonight's webinar. Before we get started and I pass over the virtual mic, I do want to note that we are going to do some Q&A at the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions throughout tonight's webinar, please type them in the Q&A box, and that'll allow us to better sort all of the questions at the end and make sure they all get answered and not buried in the chat. So again, if you have a question, please write it in the Q&A box. This webinar is also being recorded. It'll be on our YouTube channel within a couple of days. Please share that with friends and family, anyone who you think will be interested in watching it once it is published. It'll be sent to you if you attended the webinar via Zoom, so you'll easily be able to share that after the webinar. This is also being live streamed on Facebook, so if you are watching on Facebook, welcome. Please share that live stream, whether you're watching on Facebook or not, with friends and family who might be interested in tonight's topic. And with all of that being said, I am now going to turn over the virtual mic. Thank you again, Scott, Wayne, and Paul, for being with us tonight.
Well, Christopher, thank you very much for inviting me and Scott Edwards and Paul Collins to this webinar with Wolf Park. We want to thank you, Christopher, and the rest of the staff at the facility in Northwest Indiana for advocating for wolves, for caring for wolves who can't be returned to the wild, and for really trying to bring insight and awareness to this problem. You know, when you look at the animal protection and wildlife protection world, there's an animal group for almost every kind of animal. You know, I have worked with wolf protection groups and bear protection groups, even hummingbird protection groups. And from the smallest animals to these apex predators, it's really so important that individuals and groups are out there advocating for these animals and contributing to awareness and understanding about what's happening with them. It's only with this sort of work that Wolf Park does that we can maintain populations that have survived, in many cases, human onslaught, and that we can actually restore and maintain protections for these animals. So again, I'm Wayne Pacelle. I'm president of Animal Wellness Action. I'm also president of an affiliated organization called the Center for a Humane Economy. Animal Wellness Action works to protect all animals, and we mainly do so by attempting to promote legal standards to protect animals and to enforce those legal standards once they're enacted. That's at the federal level, state level, and local level. And I think the underlying notion here is that animals are very vulnerable when it comes to human exploitation. In the relationship that we have with animals, we hold all the cards, we have all the power, and this asymmetry really can lead to terrible outcomes for animals if no one is there to defend them. So whether it's looking at factory farming or the killing of wolves or mink farming or animal testing, cockfighting, somebody needs to speak up for animals. And we really, really value partnering with organizations like Wolf Park, where we may bring a little bit of a broader focus on animal issues, but an understanding of the political process and working with corporations to groups like Wolf Park that have such expertise and such understanding of these issues. So I want to just again commend your organization. For those of you listening, please support Wolf Park and its really important mission to protect wolves. Wolves, among all of the animals, have been something of a totem animal for me. I've always been keenly interested in them from the time I was a little kid, growing up in the late 60s, early 70s. Wolves were really one of the iconic species that provided the basis for enactment of the Endangered Species Act. It was the systemic exploitation of wolves across the range in the lower 48 states that really kind of provided a case example of unrestrained human behavior and exploitation toward wildlife. And when I was growing up, wolves were just barely hanging on in northeast Minnesota, in the Boundary Waters area of northeast Minnesota. And then there was a very small population of wolves that crossed the ice sheets, if you will, during the winter of Lake Superior and made it from Canada to Isle Royale National Park. And I was so fascinated by the wolves of Isle Royale National Park and the long-running study of the dynamics between wolves on Isle Royale and moose, that became a real area of inquiry for me. And when I went to college, I was a Student Conservation Association participant, and I chose Isle Royale National Park for one of my field programs during college. So I was there at Isle Royale for 3 months, June, July, and August, a little bit more, started in May actually, and was able to be in the backcountry and in that wilderness area. It's an archipelago, so a set of islands that is contained entirely within Lake Superior, which is the biggest lake in the world by surface area. And it was a 4-hour boat ride from northeast Minnesota, the Duluth area. And then it was also from Houghton, Michigan in the UP, the Upper Peninsula. It was a 5-hour boat ride. So it's very isolated, one of the least visited national parks, but just a gem of our National Park Service system, founded in 1940. But wolves study there from the 1950s now to the present day. And one of the things that was learned through this long time study of wolves is that wolves have an incredibly beneficial impact on the larger ecosystem and the health of the ecosystem. And it was the absence of wolves that allowed ungulate populations, hooved animal populations, and specifically moose, to really achieve densities that did lead to certain impacts on the forests and browse lines. I don't think anything that was cataclysmic in terms of the ecology, but it showed that wolves really kept the population within certain limits, and the populations did not fluctuate quite as dramatically as they would have without wolves. And that has implications for forest health, for water flow and stream health, and just the overall health of the ecosystem. So that was my first kind of immersion on wolf issues, and being in an environment that's wolf occupied and seeing the information that was flowing out of this long-term study, I learned that there was another aspect to our relationship with wolves, that it wasn't just that we created national parks to protect them. It wasn't just that we had no hunting and trapping to allow these animals to flourish in a wilderness area. There was a whole other approach, and that was to harm wolves, to shoot them for sport, to trap them for their furs, to kill them, to really shrink their habitat, to just have remnant populations. So partly because of the Endangered Species Act of 1973, which was the best formulation of it after the original laws that did attempt to provide some tools to protect rare species in the 1960s, this was the law that really allowed wolves to come back, and they expanded their range in northeast Minnesota to the northwest. They eventually moved into the Upper Peninsula of Michigan through Wisconsin and then into Wisconsin. And this Great Lakes population of wolves is really the biggest population of wolves that we've had in the lower 48 states. Of course, Alaska has its own population of wolves. It's substantial in this enormous state, which has so much wilderness and uninhabited land in terms of human habitation. The wolves in the Northern Rockies, of course, some of them came down from Canada and migrated into the Northern Rockies, but it was the reintroduction of wolves in Yellowstone in the mid-1990s and the success of those animals in that park, and then they're fanning out into Idaho and into Montana and into other parts of Wyoming, that showed that we do have restorative capabilities as a species. On the other hand, as wolves expanded in their range, so too did conflicts. And we have seen the historical attitudes toward wolves manifest in some of these rural areas in the upper Great Lakes and also in the Northern Rockies. And now, of course, wolves have expanded into Washington State, Oregon. They've moved into California, Utah, a number of other states in the West. But it was these packs in the Northern Rockies and the Great Lakes that stirred, for whatever reason, I think, very irrational fears about these animals. And wolves happen to be among the large predators in the world, among the most benign to humans. There are fatalities that occur, from Bengal tiger encounters with people in India. There are, small number of grizzly bear attacks on people in Alaska or Canada, or even in the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem in Montana. But, and some other species do occasionally come into conflict with people, and there are adverse encounters. It's usually a human attack on the animals, not the other way around. The numbers are startling in terms of human attacks on these predators, and very sparing in terms of the predators' attacks on people. But of all the species, wolves are about the least dangerous. On all the nights that I spent in the wilderness, out in the open, in a sleeping bag or in a tent, I never feared that wolves were going to harm me or attack me. I wanted them closer. I wished I could have had more opportunities to see them in the wild, but they stay away from people for the most part. And of course, wolves have had this long-running relationship with human beings. Wolves have changed the story of humanity. Wolves and humans began to interact anywhere from 15,000 to 29,000 years ago in a very intimate way that led to domestication. And the domestication of wolves and transforming them into Canis familiaris, the domesticated dog, and all of their different forms today has truly transformed human culture. Hunting, guarding, pulling, so many aspects of the human relationship with dogs have transformed who we are. And of course, it set the stage for other forms of domestication that changed the trajectory of the human relationship to nature. And of course, we now have these descendants of wolves in our homes and in our lives in a big way with our domesticated dogs. I share a home with a beagle, and she's the love of my life. And so many dogs are members of our families, and we have wolves to thank for that. Moving to contemporary times and noting a few things about the politics of this, I mentioned that there's an irrational response to these animals, a fear that they're going to attack people, a fear that they're going to ravage livestock, a fear that they're going to decimate deer and elk and moose populations. All of these notions are false. They are all false. There are hardly any attacks by wolves on people. The number of livestock killed by wolves is infinitesimally small compared to other natural hazards for livestock. And in terms of decimating ungulate populations and thereby threatening hunting in states like Wisconsin or Montana with elk, it just is not borne out by any of the literature. Wolves live in cooperation at some level with prey species. If they decimated them, they would be eating themselves out of house and home. They have a beneficial impact on these species by culling the weak and the sick, and therefore that cascades in an ecosystem by having them have these enormously beneficial impacts. When we see the YouTube video about Yellowstone and how wolves affect streams in Yellowstone and the forest health, we can see that more and more research has been conducted to really demonstrate the power of wolves to have a restorative effect of our ecological systems. They are a boon to the ecology of landscapes they inhabit. They are a boon to our economy, whether it's wildlife-based tourism, whether it is somewhat limiting deer populations to reduce deer auto collisions, which can threaten human life and also cause tremendous property damage in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Wolves, again, have other incredible impacts like this outbreak of chronic wasting disease with deer and other cervids. More and more information shows that where wolves thrive, chronic wasting disease does not spread among the cervids, which is a threat to those animals, but it's also a threat to hunting. So there's a much bigger narrative about wolves, and the ruthless exploitation that some people engage in, whether it is trophy hunting or trapping of wolves or damage control killing of wolves on the pretense that they're going to threaten people or livestock. There are better ways to protect livestock by non-lethal means than by randomly killing the families of wolves. But one of the most incredibly ruthless plans was executed in Wisconsin. And that's where I want to turn to my colleague, Paul Collins, who's the Wisconsin State Director for Animal Wellness Action. He is a great advocate of wolves and has been really more responsible for the protections for wolves than anyone in Wisconsin. So Paul, take it away, and thanks for your great work.
Thank you for the kind words, Wayne. I apologize, everyone, for showing up in my Popo uniform, but my employer was generous enough to let me participate in this on break. So this is not how I normally dress, only 8 hours a day. Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Collins. I'm the Wisconsin State Director for Animal Wellness Action. Our friends at Wolf Park invited us here tonight to talk a bit about Wisconsin wolves, our court victory that blocked last fall's wolf hunt, and what the future holds for this magnificent species. My colleague Scott Edwards will give you a little more detail about the ins and outs of our legal cases, but I will give you some historical background about wolves in Wisconsin and the endless battles regarding their management here. Wolves are a native species to Wisconsin. Due to government-sponsored eradication programs, the species was gone from the state by the 1950s. In 1957, Wisconsin became the first state to classify the wolf as a protected species, but by this time, they had already been completely eradicated from our state. Following the passage of the Endangered Species Act in 1973, and the subsequent growth of the last remaining population of gray wolves in the United States, in Minnesota, the species slowly began to migrate back into Wisconsin and recolonize our state. A major misconception among the anti-wolf elements is that wolves were reintroduced to our state. They were not. They naturally migrated back into Wisconsin due to these protections. The first breeding pack was not confirmed in Wisconsin until 1978. Through the mid-1990s, population growth was slow, but eventually wolves began to steadily increase their numbers here in Wisconsin. Through the 2000s, the wolf population managed to increase to several hundred, and in January 2012, the gray wolf was removed from Endangered Species Act protections in the Great Lakes region by the Obama administration. Sadly, following the removal of federal protections, Wisconsin became one of the most hostile states towards this species. In January 2012, on the very day that wolves were delisted nationally, on the very day that they were delisted in the Great Lakes region, our legislature decided to introduce a bill that would mandate a yearly wolf killing season, and it made Wisconsin the only state in the country that allowed packs of dogs to be used against wolves. From 2012 until a federal judge relisted wolves in December of 2014, Wisconsin held 3 killing seasons. In each season, the allowed kill quota was exceeded. While the wolf was back under federal protections following the 2014 federal decision, the population managed to rebound to an estimated 1,100 animals, where the number stabilized for several years. Again, unfortunately, in January of 2021, gray wolves were once again removed from Endangered Species Act protections nationwide by the Trump administration. That leads us to what occurred in 2021. In February 2021, a Kansas-based hunting organization called Hunter Nation sued the state of Wisconsin and demanded the immediate resumption of recreational wolf killing in Wisconsin. A circuit court judge agreed with them and thus ordered an immediate killing season to take place in February of 2021. State hunters had an allotted kill quota of 119. After just 60 hours, they had reported killing 218 wolves, the vast majority with the use of hounds. This occurred in the middle of the wolf breeding season. The kill total and behavior of Wisconsin wolf hunters enraged wildlife advocates, some hunters, and people all around the state and country. In contrast, this was done while both Michigan and Minnesota held off on holding immediate killing seasons, thus making Wisconsin an extreme outlier in the Great Lakes region. Following that February slaughter, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources wasted no time in setting up a kill quota for the next season that was set to occur only 8 months later. The DNR chose a quota of 130 wolves to be killed, despite not knowing the impacts of what had occurred just in February amidst the breeding season. Not to be outdone, the unelected and very vocally anti-wolf political appointees of our State Natural Resources Board decided to go with an absurd kill quota of 300 animals. The DNR rebuffed this decision and settled on their slightly less repugnant 130 number. Our organization, Animal Wellness Action, and a coalition of other wildlife advocacy groups then filed a state-level lawsuit to try and stop this absurdity. Again, my colleague Scott Edwards will be able to delve more into that lawsuit, our victory, and the subsequent relisting of wolves that occurred following a lawsuit challenging the federal full lower 48 delisting. Currently, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources is formulating an updated management plan to bring to date the very much outdated one that was first developed in 1999, and it was last reviewed in 2007. The anti-wolf factions in our state are pushing to have the wolf population reduced to the absurdly low number of 350 or less and capped at 350. There is no scientific basis for this number, yet it has become the rallying cry for the extremist anti-wolf politicians in my state and the equally extremist hunting groups in our state. This, while Wisconsin continues to be the only state in the country that pays hound hunters when one of their dogs is allegedly killed by wolves. Because much of these payouts come from federal grants, your tax money is being used for the losers in these legal and state-sanctioned dogfights. Make no mistake that the gray wolf in Wisconsin is indeed an endangered species, as court after court has shown. While they have shown great resilience in the face of government-sanctioned hostility and rampant poaching, without a nationwide recovery plan, the species will only be allowed to exist in very small pockets. And even in those small pockets, wolves will be relentlessly harassed by government-sanctioned and unregulated 24/7, 365-day-a-year hound training to be used against wolves. In other words, again, legal dogfighting. Also, the wolves will be subjected to revenge killings by government agents such as the USDA so-called wildlife services. While they are under federal protection, these activities are not allowed to occur in Wisconsin. As we have seen, when those protections are removed, the killing and harassment will begin with a vengeance and begin immediately. Sadly, forces in Congress are once again trying to force a delisting of the gray wolf and block any judicial review of that decision. Not only is that unscientific, but it is also undemocratic. This push is being led by Wisconsin Senators Ron Johnson, a Republican, and Tammy Baldwin, a Democrat. For all the talk of the partisan divide in our country, it sure seems that the hatred of wolves is often a bipartisan endeavor. We cannot allow them to succeed. On another note, I do want to thank Wolf Park for hosting me back in August for an amazing visit. It was an absolutely wonderful experience to see in person what I've been fighting for so long. And if anybody listening to this has a chance, I highly recommend paying a visit to this incredible place, meeting the staff, and seeing again firsthand what amazing creatures these wolves are and what you will not be able to see on a daily basis. Please visit them when you have the chance. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. My name is Scott Edwards. I'm General Counsel for Animal Wellness Action in the Center for Humane Economy. And I joined with Wayne a couple of years ago now to work on a whole host of wildlife issues. My background has been largely in environmental protection. I've worked on a whole range of environmental issues over my decades-long career, and I'm certainly no stranger to the role that politics can play in a whole host of issues, and I've witnessed it on a range of issues on environmental protection. But as an attorney, when I began to work on the wolf issue at AWA with the delisting, the federal delisting that Paul spoke about, I was just struck by the level of influence that politics is having on wolf conservation. For I think many of the reasons that Wayne spoke about, wolves have become a political football in this country, used to further the political wishes and goals of our elected officials on the state and on the federal level. And I was shocked looking at the history of wolf protection in this country, looking at the delisting, and then looking at state protections, how much these were simply politically driven decisions, detached completely from sound science, from strong conservation measures, from good approaches to wolf management. And I'm going to talk about Wisconsin in a little bit, but what we saw with the delisting decision at the end of the Trump administration, which Paul talked about, was clearly on its face after reading, again, approaching this as an attorney, reading that final delisting decision. It was on its face divorced from sound science. And it became clear, looking at that decision-making, that what was in play here was an upcoming election and an attempt to sway votes, and again, using wolves for that purpose. And so when you think about the mass killing and the slaughter that's been going on that both Wayne and Paul have talked about, it is so troubling to me to think that what in part is driving that is the goal and hopes of elected officials that they can remain in office. I mean, that is simply an outrageous motive that's at play in here. The federal delisting occurred again, became effective just at the end of the Trump administration. And as Paul has mentioned, Wisconsin jumped on that decision to begin a wolf slaughter. But my task as an attorney was to try to come up with legal mechanisms to try to stop, number one, reverse the federal delisting, And number two, stop states like Wisconsin, who were jumping at the chance to re-enter the wolf slaughter game that they've eagerly were trying to implement with the federal delisting. And I've worked with a wonderful team of lawyers in trying to figure out how to do this. We knew that the federal delisting and the challenge to the delisting, we knew we were on strong legal grounds. Again, that federal delisting, the final rule, was on its face defective and illegal. And we felt very strongly that once we got into court, we would be able to defeat that. But we had time working against us. Wisconsin had immediately proposed a hunt and began to kill wolves as soon as that delisting became effective. And we knew that the federal courts would take 8 months, a year, 14 months, even on an expedited basis to vacate and restore federal protections. And so some legal mechanism to try to get into courts in Wisconsin to try to stop what Wisconsin was doing. Unfortunately, given the timing and the rapid movement, we could not stop that early 2021 hunt that Paul talked about that resulted in such an outrageous slaughter of wolves. But we knew that they weren't finished and that we needed to prepare for a hunt that we were pretty certain that they were going to plan for later in 2021. And so, again, we worked with a group of lawyers, went into the Wisconsin court systems. And our theory in that case was that the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources and the Wisconsin Natural Resources Board was approaching wolf conservation in such a reckless manner. And we had very good wolf conservationists on our side who would examine their management plans and looked at their population numbers and their conservation approaches and the plans they had in place and said, number one, this is an ancient plan. It hasn't been updated in years. DNR has admitted that it hasn't updated its plan. And B, even the substance of the plan was completely devoid of any sound conservation measures. And so we went into Wisconsin courts seeking an injunction against the hunt. If you want to know how strongly politics plays into this decision making, you really don't need to look any further than one of the arguments that DNR was making, and that the judge in the Hunter Nation case that Paul referenced bought into, and that is that the Wisconsin legislature, regardless of the health of wolf populations in Wisconsin, regardless of whether there's 100 wolves or 500 wolves or 800 wolves, mandates that a wolf hunt take place. So the legislature mandates the killing of wolves in Wisconsin, regardless of the health of the packs. And DNR often pointed to that, and the Natural Resources Board, which ultimately made the decision and is filled with board members who own sports shops that sell equipment for hunting, who have a whole number of them have a list of open conflicts, but yet are making these decisions about how many wolves can get killed each year. And so, again, we're looking at sort of the political drive behind wolf hunting and wolf killing in this state. And we knew we were up against going into a case that was going to be an uphill battle for us. We didn't have a lot of confidence in the Wisconsin court systems that had regularly upheld wolf hunts. And as Paul had mentioned just in the prior hunt before, when Hunter Nation brought its case, readily approved and required the hunt to continue. But we put together a great case. Our lawyers put together a great case. We worked very hard on that case, and we got what we hoped to get was an injunction against the hunt, shutting down the second hunt that was planned in 2021, which had an extremely high quota. and thereby avoided a second slaughter in the state of Wisconsin by getting that injunction. The judge was not friendly and not sympathetic to any of the arguments that DNR made. And, I'm not going to recount some of the statements in his decision, but it's posted online. And for those who are interested, he made very compelling and strong arguments against why a wolf hunt in Wisconsin would have been an absolute travesty and a violation of DNR's obligation to conserve wolf populations in the state. So it was a wonderful outcome for us. And then it was followed very quickly. We had filed an amicus case in the federal lawsuit because, again, our goal was to stop at the state level the imminent hunts till we can get federal protections back in place. And as I'm sure you all know, those federal protections were restored fairly recently when a court found what we knew to be evident, that there was not a good scientific basis for many of the conclusions in the final delisting decision by Department of Interior. So we're now in a place where, at least for now, federal protections are restored. In many states, wolves cannot be hunted. We have the Northern Rockies, which are a whole nother problem, and there are legal mechanisms in place to try to address that through petitions that this summer we'll get a final answer on. And so there will be more legal battles ahead when that decision comes out on that petition. But the fight to protect wolves is far from over. There is so much more work to be done. We have a Department of Interior now that has filed a notice of intent to appeal the vacature of the delisting. So they weren't happy with the judge's decision. We don't know if they're going to follow through with the appeal or not, but the fact that they're even contemplating the appeal and try to get that delisting restored, I think tells us that we have several fights ahead of us. We still, as I said, have the Northern Rockies, and Paul mentioned, and I think Wayne is going to touch on this a little bit in a minute, more battles, I think, to be fought on the congressional level, depending on how things play out. Again, when wolves are being used for politics, we are not going to see an end to the need to stay vigilant, to continue to engage in these battles, to organize, to lobby, and to bring these cases as they're needed. The courts have been our savior on many occasions when it comes to wolf protection, and we are prepared fully to use them again as we need to continue to protect this species. And with that, I'll turn it back to Wayne.
Great, Scott. Thank you so much for that, and thanks, Paul, for all of your comments. I just want to give a little bit of an overarching perspective here. We think that there are perhaps 5,500 to 6,000 wolves in the lower 48 states. That might be a generous estimate. Think about Indiana, not one of our biggest states in the country. Indiana's biggest city has 879,000 people. That's Indianapolis. And then they've got 3 other cities, Fort Wayne, Evansville, and South Bend, with more than 100,000. So think about one small town. We would consider it a small town to say that a city or town has 6,000 people. So you have to go down the list of Indiana cities, and the 114th largest city is Portland, Indiana. I don't know how many of you have heard of Portland, Indiana, but that has 5,972 people. That's considered a small town. That's a small little patch of a few square acres, and 6,000 people live on that. In the entire United States, one of the 5 biggest countries, lower 48 states, excluding Alaska and Hawaii, 48 states, one of the biggest land masses in the world. The United States is one of the 5 biggest countries in the world. there are 5,000 to 6,000 wolves dispersed over millions and millions and millions of acres. These are inedible animals. No one kills them for food. They live in very close families where the brothers and the sisters and the parents and the grandparents are together in these families. These are the animals that gave life to the domesticated dogs in our lives. These are the animals that have had beneficial impacts in all the ecosystems in which they live, that are just about never implicated in any human attacks on people, and that kill a tiny percentage of all of the livestock killed by natural causes. Where is our head? What a warped view of wolves some people have as these marauding animals who are unsafely living in our environments. This is a test of whether we can tolerate one of the most remarkable animals in the world, an animal that has a special kinship to humanity and to humans, and who set us on a trajectory to have civilization. I mean, if you think about all the important things that have happened in the history of Homo sapiens, it was the domestication of animals that started with the domestication of dogs that came from wolves that set us on our course. What's amazing is that in Congress, there continue to be efforts to remove federal protections for wolves. And what happens when you remove federal protections for wolves? You let states and their fish and wildlife agencies, which are captive to trophy hunting and trapping interests, call all the shots. They want to kill these animals. They want to set up trophy hunting seasons and trapping seasons, even though the wolves need no management like that at all. We have a federal agency, U.S. Department of Agriculture's Wildlife Services, that kills hundreds of wolves a year. You have ranching interests, cattle interests, and sheep interests who want to kill the wolves, even though it's known that non-lethal methods are far more effective in deterring the very minimal amount of wolf predation that exists. The point is that we need you and we need other advocates to speak up about protecting wolves. We at Animal Wellness Action cannot do it alone. Wolf Park can't do it alone. Let's join together. It was our small group that fended off this massacre that was planned for wolves in the fall of 2021, not too far from Wolf Park in Wisconsin, just a few hours away. I'm so proud that we did that. I commend Paul Collins, my colleague, who's our state director in Wisconsin, Scott Edwards, our general counsel, for helping to engineer that. It shows that one person can make a difference. You can make a difference. We can all make a difference on this issue. And I'm grateful to the Wolf Park team for really speaking up for wolves. We're really excited to partner with them. And I'll turn this back to Christopher with Wolf Park to see if any questions are in the queue.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wayne, and Animal Wellness Action in general for coming up on Wolf Park's virtual platform tonight. Thank you, Scott and Paul, for all the great discussion and diving into the policy and legal actions that you all have been taking to fight for wolf protections. Sorry, my throat is a little scratchy tonight. We really appreciate you being on our platform and also speaking so kindly of Wolf Park as well. It was great to have you out, Paul. It was great to hear that you had a good visit. Wayne and Scott, I hope to see you at Wolf Park pretty soon. We definitely have some questions lining up in the Q&A, so I will jump right into that. So the first one says, first, thank you so much for your important work that you are doing because these issues of delisting and kill quotas are so abhorrent. And to think that so much of this is political is just wild. So it seems that no matter the education of folks and awareness of what is happening doesn't matter much. Does Animal Wellness Action collaborate with other groups such as Indigenous groups in Wisconsin to create stronger protections for wolves?
Yeah, let me just start with that one of the partners that we've had in our federal litigation efforts to restore protections to wolves under the ESA has been the Chippewa. So the Sault Ste. Marie band of Chippewa Indians in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is a wolf-inhabited part of the U.S. About 675 wolves are estimated to live in the vast expanses of the UP above the Lower Peninsula of Michigan. They've been great partners, and they brought this issue to the National Congress of Indians. I forget I think it's National Congress of Indian Americans or Indians. And that Congress unanimously blessed the idea of protecting wolves, restoring federal protections. Almost all of the Indian tribes oppose the trophy hunting and trapping of wolves because wolves play a very big part in the creation stories of tribal societies and communities, and they consider wolves to be their brothers. But Paul or Scott, I don't know if you want to add to that, but the tribes have been tremendous allies to us, and we do work with them.
I'll just add really quickly, and then Paul, you can jump in. In addition, on the federal side, we worked with a wonderful coalition of organizations across the country that were focused on wolf conservation. I think we ended up with, I want to say 14, 15 different organizations joining with us in the federal effort to get the federal rule reinstated. And that's what it's going to take, a national coalition of grassroots and regional and national organizations all working together to achieve this goal. We're up against very powerful interests. And so coalition building has been critical in our efforts, and we look forward to continuing to do that.
Yeah, I echo what Scott says. We've been working with the tribes in the state, and they've been fantastic. The Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission, GLFWC as they're known as, they obviously didn't directly partner with us, but many of their people have worked with us on these issues, and they even participated in some voluntary necropsies on some of the wolves killed from February. So they've been directly involved, and wonderful people, wonderful organization. I'm proud to work with our tribal brothers and sisters.
It was so great to hear. And that is a good segue into one of our other questions, which is how many organizations that you are aware of are mounting legal challenges to the multitude of political affronts to the protection of wolves?
Let me start by just saying that litigation strategies are just one piece, and a lot of the larger groups are able to muster the resources to get into court. There were, Scott, how many? I mean, there were probably 10 or 12 major organizations that were involved in the federal delisting effort, but then we had on our amicus, I think 30 plus organizations, didn't we? Was that the number, or am I overestimating that number?
It was a bit less than that, but we had a good number of 15, 18, 16, somewhere around there. I'd have to count.
But I will say that sign-on letters in terms of wolf protection are getting more and more organizations joining in. When I was involved in first round of litigation in the Northern Great Lakes states more than a decade ago to restore protections for wolves, I felt like it was just a handful of organizations that were with us. Most of the national conservation organizations were entirely absent. It was a few humane organizations that fought the battle. Now you see the conservation groups are much more active. The tribes are very, very active. And you have this outpouring of grassroots organizations that are concerned about wolves. In spite of that, lawmakers many lawmakers are still hell-bent on removing federal protections for wolves. And we're a totally nonpartisan organization at Animal Wellness Action. We work with Republicans and Democrats on so many issues. But I will say that this issue at the federal level has become fairly partisan. You do have Democrat Senator Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, who's an anti-wolf lawmaker, but most of the Democrats support wolves, and the vast majority of Republicans are against wolves in terms of maintaining federal protections. And I don't say that in any partisan way. It's just a fact. I wish it wasn't the case, but it's an inescapable conclusion. And the Democrats have majorities, a very narrow majority in the House and a razor thin majority in the Senate, with Kamala Harris breaking the tie in the Senate because it's a 50-50 Senate. If the Republicans do gain control of the House and Senate, they stand a very reasonable chance of having a federal delisting bill pass. With Chairman Raul Grijalva, the chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee, he's a very strong pro-wolf advocate. He would not allow that bill to advance. And the current crop of Democrat leaders, Nancy Pelosi, Charles Schumer, are for maintaining federal protections and are against attempting to have the Congress remove federal protections for wolves. And again, I don't say that in any partisan way. It's just a fact on where the votes have lined up, where lawmakers have lined up. There are many bills that we work on that have Republican leaders, and they are passionate about animals, and we applaud that, and we work with them, and we support them. But on the wolf issue, we don't see bipartisanship. And in Wisconsin, we see this collaboration between a Democrat and a Republican senator to try to kill wolves. Whereas, in the Great Lakes region, the leading wolf advocate is Senator Gary Peters of Michigan. It's a wolf-occupied state, but he's been fighting and leading efforts to protect wolves, even though there are wolves in his state.
I just want to also jump in on the coalition question. It's, as Wayne said, a lot of the big groups and national groups can go into court and make the legal arguments, and they did so in the federal delisting. We engaged in the federal delisting because we thought it was critical that local grassroots organizations have a voice in what's happening to wolves on the ground. And so, for example, Paul and the folks he works with in Wisconsin, we needed to have their voice heard in that litigation about what was happening to wolves on the ground, and not just make it a legal argument, but make it an argument about the wolves and the survivability of wolves and what was happening to wolves in the absence of federal delisting. And I think that's critical in these coalition efforts, even if we're talking about future legislation and fighting that off, is that the grassroots, the local groups, that you folks out there that are in the state working on these wolf issues day after day after day and experience what's happening at the state level, are part of these coalitions, and your voice is being heard. And I think that has tremendous power and sway.
Thank you. We have a lot more questions to get through too, if you are still willing to keep plowing through. We have a question about the parallels between Wisconsin and the Northern Rocky Mountain states in terms of the legislation that's gone on. The question is, are the legal battles to create stronger protections for wolves similar in both of those areas as well? Because obviously it's been different timelines of when they've actually been delisted.
Wisconsin really was the worst state because it was the first, it's the first state to have allowed the use of dogs in hunting wolves, which Paul Collins rightly characterized as an animal fighting situation. Wolves are pack animals. The hounds that are used to chase bears or bobcats or mountain lions, or in this case, wolves, are also, operating as a pack. That leads to an animal fighting situation when they confront each other. A mountain lion runs into a tree, or a bear runs into a tree to escape the trailing hounds, and then the hunter comes and shoots the animal out of the tree, which I think is incredibly unsporting and awful. But with wolves, they don't run up a tree; they stand and fight. And Wisconsin, with its requirement to have a hunt once the animals were delisted, and then allowing neck snares, steel traps, packs of dogs, night hunting, use of night vision, that opened the way for Idaho to develop similarly ruthless plans. And then Wisconsin also did. And some of the states have essentially set up bounty programs for wolves, or they allowed a bounty program to be used. But Paul, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this as well.
Well, Wisconsin has this little, pretty much, not pretty much, it is, when wolves are not under federal protection, there are 0 rules in place about training the hounds against wolves. So they can pit dogs 24/7, 365 against wolves. And there's nothing saying that they cannot use those dogs to actually fight the wolves. The only prohibition is they can't let the dogs kill the wolves. In other words, they can fight as much as they want. Not a thing will happen. No citations, nothing. It's just absolute insanity. And then the difference between Wisconsin and the Rocky Mountain states, in 2011, the Obama administration and Congress signed into law the infamous budget rider that delisted wolves in the Northern Rockies. So that delisting was the first time and a species was removed from Endangered Species Act protections by congressional mandate. That's what we're afraid of happening here in Wisconsin and the Great Lakes. If that happens, we're going to be in the same boat they are in the Northern Rockies, and it's going to be very hard to reinstate protections once they're lost that way.
Yeah, and I'll just, the big distinction from the legal perspective between what happened in Wisconsin and what's happening in the Northern Rockies is Wisconsin completely dropped the ball in updating its conservation plan and having something in place and opened the door wide for us to come in and say that they're completely derelict in their obligations. The Northern Rockies have had years of covering themselves from a legal perspective. And I think the question was about legally what happened and what's the difference. So they do update their management plans. They do go back. They're lousy management plans, but they sort of cross their I's and dot their T's in the hope that they can withstand a court ruling against them. And I and many other lawyers have been racking our brains about good legal strategies to go after Northern Rockies. And there's currently a legal petition in place that many folks feel is the best chance to get protections back in place in the Northern Rockies. And we'll see how that comes out in the summer. But we continue, certainly as attorneys, to look at ways to stop the slaughter in the Northern Rockies and come up with good legal theories.
So obviously a lot of this is pretty disheartening. We have a question about how does the average member of the public actually feel about these delistings in Wisconsin and in other states, not the hunting interest groups or special interest groups? How does the average member of the public feel?
Well, I think there's been not enough engagement by the public on this issue, which is what has allowed some of these politicians to get away with these reckless programs. We've known that the state fish and wildlife agencies are captive to the hunting lobby. But what's amazing is that some of the politicians are even more extreme than these extreme state fish and wildlife agencies. It's just remarkable. And I think this is one of the problems with, one of the challenges with animal issues. There's so many problems that there's a lot of diffusion of energy and interest, which is why it's really important for every animal to have its advocacy groups like Wolf Park is. And it's important for groups like Animal Wellness Action to be able to use our know-how to challenge these adverse political actions against wolves. Again, I just keep coming back, 6,000 wolves in the United States. More people in Portland, Indiana than there are wolves in the lower 48 states. It's absolutely incredible. And we have to get together. That's why I really encourage people, get involved with Wolf Park, go to animalwellnessaction.org and sign up for our alerts. We will keep you apprised of federal legislation to cause harm to wolves, and we'll get you involved in the effort to fight these maneuvers. But we can't just fight it alone. We need an army of people. But we swing pretty hard, and the Wisconsin elected officials who want to kill wolves know about us now because we stopped their killing plans, and we've had success in many states. If you look at the picture right now in the lower 48 states, wolves have restored protection, it's actually a pretty good situation now for wolves. They have endangered status in Wisconsin. They have endangered status in Michigan. That's the higher form of ESA protection. A lower threshold, but still a strongly protective threshold, is threatened status. The problem area is the Northern Rockies, where Paul mentioned there was a congressional rider to remove protections, and Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming came in, and we are part of a petition to have the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service review the status of wolves in the Northern Rockies to have their protections restored. We think that the recovery goals that had been set years ago are way too low. We know so much more now about minimum thresholds of wolf populations, and the standard of protection is not just scarcity, is also, are there threats that are going to drive the numbers down? And when you have Idaho allowing hunting 365 days a year with the use of dogs and traps, and when you have Wyoming having very few limits on killing and Montana very few limits on killing, you see that why it's a threat. It's the combination of scarcity, but also the lack of restraints by state agencies. And the Northern Rockies are the most perilous place for wolves right now.
So I think that is a good segue into basically all of the questions that we have left. We have quite a few, and all of them are essentially hitting on what can the average person do to support your work at the Animal Wellness Action? What can the average person do for wolves in general? Do petitions work? Handwritten letters? What do each of you recommend that the average person go do either right now or in the next week to help wolves?
Well, I think the most important thing to do is you've got to become part of groups that are keeping apprised of every step that's made on this issue. So we'll do that, and we'll be partnering with Wolf Park on this issue. So get involved, even if you're not a member and can't, pony up the $20 or $50 to join, and we hope you can for both groups. Get in the information flow, sign up on the websites, and we'll keep you apprised. Second, this is a political issue because it's not a big corporation that's doing something. It's wolves are, considered in quotes a public resource, and it's government rules and government standards that are going to mean life or death for wolves, extinction or viability for wolves. And contact your 2 U.S. senators, contact your U.S. representative. If you're in Indiana, there are no wolves there, and there's no prospect for wolves coming into Indiana in terms of wild free roaming wolves. But obviously, if you're in Wisconsin or Minnesota, Michigan, all the more important to get involved. If you're in Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, critically important to get involved there politically. But federal standards and fending off federal delisting, because I'm confident that the courts are going to uphold the existing standard that wolves deserve federal protection. It will be several years before that is reversed by the courts if wolves did recover and their numbers increased and they got off the list. But congressional delisting is a very big threat. That's a political fight.
I want to chime in one thing. Letters to your local newspaper. That is huge. Even if it's just a couple of sentences, a couple of paragraphs, send a letter to your local newspaper, because a lot of people do not know about what's going on. They pick up their local paper, like here in Wisconsin. So many people do not know that Tammy Baldwin is anti-wolf. Even though she's been anti-wolf for several years, it still shocks people when they find out. People need to know this stuff. People are shocked when they find out the 2 Democrats from Minnesota, senators, are anti-wolf. People need to know this stuff. Write to your paper, even if it educates just one person. You've done something good. You've educated people something they didn't know. And keep following up with your politicians. Keep letting them know that you are not paying it, or that you are paying attention to what they're doing, even though they keep it on the down low. Let everybody know what they're doing. They're hoping a lot of this slides by in the background.
Yeah, I don't. I think Wayne and Paul have covered most of what I was going to say. The only thing I would add is what we witnessed in Wisconsin, certainly. And you know, I hope that federal protections remain in place for years to come, and we can't predict the future. But what happened in Wisconsin in January of 2021, when that delisting went away suddenly, and Wisconsin jumped on the opportunity, it was a critical time for activists to engage, even at the state level and the regulatory agency level, and demand, you know, that conservation plans that are based on science be implemented. And these may sound sort of in the weeds kinds of things that folks need to do, but the fact that in Wisconsin, many people came out against what the agency was trying to do and went on the record and attended hearings, and Paul went to hearings and organized community members to go to these hearings and have their voices heard. Those were things that we could use in court as lawyers and put before judges and say, 70% of the comments that were submitted to this agency didn't want to see wolves being hunted in this state. And there's overwhelming support to preserve wolf populations and to have sound science behind decision-making. And those things sway judges when it comes time to go into court and fight off irresponsible government actions like this.
Awesome. That is a great way to conclude, I think, is a lot of hopeful notes of what people can do at home to help you all at Animal Wellness Action, to help us at Wolf Park, and to help wolf populations throughout the country. Thank you again, Scott, Wayne, and Paul, so much for being with us this evening. And thank you to Animal Wellness Action overall for all that your organization does for wolves in the United States. Again, this webinar was recorded. So it'll be on YouTube within the next couple of days. It was also live streamed on Facebook. So another thing you can do to help is just share this webinar with your friends and your family who may not be as well versed on wolf knowledge as you. And you can also go sign up for Wolf Park's email list at wolfpark.org to get advocacy updates. I am sure Animal Wellness Action has an email sign up on their website as well, and ways to join. So go do that, follow both groups on social media, and you are going to be very much up to date on what is happening with wolf populations in the United States and in the globe. So thank you again to Scott, Paul, and Wayne for joining us, and thank you to everyone who watched. It is people like you that helps both of our organizations keep going with our missions and help protect wolves. So thank you all again, and have a good night.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
for hosting us.
All right. Take care.
Yep. Good night.
Good night.